Thank you, everybody, for joining us for Shop Experts Live, where we cut straight to the core of what's driving success in today's automotive industry. Today's guest, I'm pleased to have, is Mike Muller from SEMA Garage. When I first met Mike several years ago at SEMA's Detroit Garage, I just thought to myself, man, this guy knows way more than the average person about ADAS and all things engineering. So when it came time to speak to an expert on the topic of ADAS, Mike was my first call. Real quickly for everybody who's here, Mike Muller is the aftermarket ADAS engineer at the SEMA Garage in Detroit. He is an automotive technologist with 40 years of experience, including both OEM and aftermarket electronic service tool development. And since 2001, Mike has specialized in creating unique electronic service solutions, diagnostic products, and solutions for several startups within Bosch Automotive aftermarket services. In the last decade, though, he's brought successful solutions to market for the newest emerging automotive technologies, EV charging, connected cloud services, and most recently, during his time at SEMA and before, ADAS recalibration. As the SEMA ADAS engineer, Mike works to support a balanced need for aftermarket product development, and while ensuring all of the stakeholders in the emerging ADAS field are elevated in their understanding of ADAS technologies. Mike, the last part of your bio couldn't read more perfectly for today's quick interview. There was a lot there, but I want people to understand where you're coming from, what your credentials are. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started if you're all right with that.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, very good. So SEMA Garage. Let's start there because it's not even the SEMA Garage out in California, it's the SEMA Garage in Detroit. Can you talk about the garage itself, its ADAS program, and some of the work being done there?
Sure. So when the SEMA Garage was conceived for Detroit, there was a lack of space at the SEMA Garage in California in order to support ADAS calibration and ADAS research. So they definitely made a choice to have extra square footage and put in two ADAS labs. We have an aftermarket ADAS lab and an OEM lab. The aftermarket lab is compiled of many different ADAS calibration systems from different calibration companies like Autel and Bosch, Hunter, and AirPro, Aztec, Opus. We've got all of the tools, the TPMS tools, all the battery charging support tools that you needed to do an ADAS calibration. And so we've pulled that all in under one lab. In that lab, we also have all of the aftermarket OEM tools, right? So we can support our members in whatever kind of calibration and or product development research they need to do, which I'll get into a little bit more. The other thing that we have is we actually have an end-of-line production ADAS calibration station. It came right out of the Ford F-150 plant here in Dearborn, Michigan. It's an exact duplicate and provides the same function. So we're serious about ADAS here at SEMA and for our members.
No, that's fantastic. And I've had the chance to see it firsthand. There's no doubt about how serious you guys are taking it, which is really cool to see. So I read about ADAS. You only need to subscribe to one or two industry publications, and you're going to continually see throughout the week and months some sort of headline or news notification about ADAS. But for those people who are shop owners, whether it be in the repair space or the aftermarket space, I just want to set the table first by understanding what's the percentage of vehicles out there with ADAS? Is this something that's been around for a while? Is it more of an emerging technology? Let's just kind of establish that first before we dig further into it.
Sure. You've had ADAS on your car since 2017 when the backup camera was mandated by a federal motor vehicle safety requirement. That's Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 111. And so that was implemented by all of the OEMs starting in 15 until 17. So the backup camera is an example of ADAS. That's kind of the original thought on ADAS, but really where it's gone is the front-facing cameras, front-facing radars. And those cameras, although they're not mandated by a federal standard yet, they actually had an agreement between IIHS and NHTSA that all of the OEMs signed a letter of intent in 2018 to commit to having that front-facing camera in all of their production vehicles by 2022, September of 22. So if you buy any vehicle of a 23 or newer, it's going to have a front-facing camera in the windshield. So every car has ADAS today. Whether the OEM, the car companies actually implement it and how they implement it is different, But yeah, today ADAS is ubiquitous. It's in every vehicle, either the backup camera or your front-facing camera.
So that being said, it sounds like since 2017 or even 2011, there's a lot that has happened. Can you talk about, based on what you're seeing, based upon your research at the SEMA Garage, let's think about the next 5 to 10 years and how that might be changing, how ADAS might be changing the repair and the aftermarket space. It's newer to consumers, I would say, and there's a lot of shop owners that are trying to figure out what to do with it. So, your take on that.
Yeah, so ADAS as a technology has been around for a while, and there's a few technologies that are ready to be all at the same time. Cybersecurity is a big challenge, right? And then hybrid and EV implementation, those are probably the two other items in the automotive industry that are kind of leading edge, but ADAS is going to be even more significant because it affects so many parts of the vehicle. If you have a camera, it affects your windshield. If you have a tint, it affects your windshield. If you have radars in the front, it can affect your bumpers. You can't have aftermarket bumpers with dissimilar materials than the OEM had. Wraps, lifts, of course, all the suspension work requires ADAS recalibration. Winches in the front, anything that impedes the camera or the radar is going to be affected by an ADAS service procedure. Not to mention the rear radar in your quarter panels. There are a lot of reasons why over the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to become a challenge for our aftermarket members and shops to be working in ADAS. It's already started, of course. It started in the glass industry, and then it went to the collision industry. But really importantly, there's a research paper out there that's showing that the mechanic industry, mechanics are going to be taking over that glass and collision as far as the volume in ADAS calibrations. Everybody is going to be touching this. Everyone needs to know about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up that research paper because prior to this, you did provide me with a number of resources, and we'll make sure to include those and make those available
They're helpful
to anybody watching this video. And I want to now kind of narrow some things down, but before we get specifically to that, I'm curious because you have been doing so much research. What are some of the more common or even uncommon discoveries that you've found that would surprise shop owners?
So the main thing that I was actually hired into SEMA after I left my time at Bosch was to do research on modified vehicles and the ADAS functionality and how it is affected by basically a lift or a lower kit. And so we know that that camera or that radar is calibrated at the factory from the production vehicle to look down the road, and it sees, for example, 500 feet, and it knows 500 feet is 500 feet. But what happens is when you put all trucks, for example, come with the nose down, the rake angle is down. And when you put just a level kit, that changes the rake angle and the perspective of the camera, which definitely affects the ADAS function. So our job here at the SEMA Garage was to quantify that because there's no OEM support necessarily to tell us how far we can lift a vehicle or lower a vehicle or change a rake angle and still do it safely. That's our main goal, is to make sure that we're modifying and servicing, repairing vehicles safely. And so we've done the research at a facility called the Transportation Research Center in Ohio, where we modified a vehicle, recalibrated it, and then reran the test from the stock configuration. Typically a 2-inch lift or lower does not affect the ADAS very much. A 3.5, 4-inch lift affects it some more, but it's still within the old guidelines. There are something called the New Car Assessment Program guidelines, and they're fairly old. They're from 13 and 15. And all of these modifications that we tested meet those guidelines. The good news is the current modifications, small lifts, small lowers, not affecting ADAS significantly. Now, when we get up to a 6-inch lift and more, all bets are off. It's getting a little bit out of the range of the operating area of the cameras and radars from the OEMs.
Okay. So that's really interesting. It's definitely food for thought. Thinking back to not only what you just talked about there, but some of the other things you mentioned previously. It can affect tint or window replacements, lifts, bumpers, things like that. Any vehicle that's had any of that work done can be found in just about any type of aftermarket shop and any type of general repair shop. The common thread between those two worlds is the consumer. And so where my mind goes next is, what sort of education is needed for the consumer to really understand the significance of ADAS when it comes to recalibrations and things like that? Because it's a new charge that they're probably not used to seeing and a new line item that they're not used to seeing. Can you talk about, maybe how that needs to be handled or what shop owners can be expecting when they start talking to the consumer?
So the first thing I would say is that education of both the consumer and the shop personnel is paramount. You have to be an educated consumer and an educated service provider in order to do a good day's honest work, right? And one of the things that I do here at SEMA is I try to elevate our members. We have all different kinds of members. Some of them know a lot about ADAS. Some of them know a little bit. Some of them know nothing. We need to make sure that people use the resources that you're going to provide at the end of this presentation to actually start learning about ADAS. If they don't know, if they know something, they can go to the next level. There's always a changing landscape in automotive, right? So prior to 15 years ago, we did not have TPMS, tire pressure management systems. We did not have a backup camera. We didn't have all of these electronic stability controls and ABS things. Every time one of these technologies came in, the industry rallied and figured it out, right? It wasn't perfect at the beginning, specifically ABS, and the same thing with ADAS. It's not perfect, but it's being refined. And everybody who is in the service environment needs to understand if their service repair affects an ADAS system. And the default should actually be, it affects it. What does it affect? And then you can actually discount it if it doesn't affect it. But I forgot to mention trailering, right? There's just so many different things that people have to be exposed to. So as far as the OEMs and tier ones, they're very forward thinking. The thing would be to do is read the research out there, our SEMA ADAS research on modified vehicles, understand what's a kind of a safe operating limit and what is kind of a taboo area. Go to the NHTSA website, learn the basics of ADAS from NHTSA, and then there's other education areas that you can go to too here.
Okay, so we've talked a little about the consumer. Going back to the shop owner, from their standpoint, can you talk a little bit about the resources that are going to be or would be needed in order to be able to provide true comprehensive ADAS services in that type of environment? What does that look like?
Yeah, so as far as the resources from the shop perspective, you said?
Yeah, from the shop perspective.
Oh, well, first of all, you have to have qualified people, right? You definitely have to have qualified people. You have to think outside the box because you're going to have some new processes that you're going to need to learn, right?
Yeah.
So it's not the standard mechanic's job to do an ADAS calibration. You've got to have diagnostics experience. And also you need to have the tools and equipment. Mainly you need the commitment to it. You got to do your research, visit other shops that are already doing ADAS much more than you are to understand what the pros and cons of this industry is. But there's so much more to it. There are consultants, besides going to the dealerships, which we don't talk about, right? The aftermarket always seems to be the majority workplace for any new technology, right? So they definitely they can start consulting with a couple of ADAS companies that are they're not just consultants, but they have a stake in the game, right? So not only do they help you with the equipment and technician training and things like that, but you end up getting the building sourcing. Should you be in a specific market or region? Is it profitable to be in that region? What about the building facilities itself? You've got to have special requirements. The lighting has to be right. There has to be a great, perfectly flat floor. There's all kinds of things. There's so much more. So there's a company called Car ADAS. They started about 3.5, 4 years ago. And they come in and they can actually be a consultant in any one of those areas or the whole turnkey solution, including a kind of a tracking mechanism for your KPIs of success. And interestingly, their success is tied to your success. So they have a vested interest. They come out or you go to their facility and do training on OEM procedures and training on your specific ADAS calibration equipment. And then they come to you after a couple of weeks and actually fine tune your training. So they have a vested interest. And I think that's a good business model, but definitely do the investigation. Car ADAS, again, will be provided at the end of this.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And I want to stick with the people for just a second, because that was the first thing that you mentioned was
people are most important in any business, right?
Exactly. So drilling down just a little bit further on skill sets, things that maybe a shop owner need, if they've got a team of 3 or 4 people, what are the things that they need to be looking for in their staff if this
Yeah.
is something that they're going to expand into?
Yeah, so you do have to analyze your current staff to see if they have the capabilities, right? Again, consulting with some people in the industry, but my observations is you need a very detail-oriented person. You need somebody who's not going to go off track, right? Somebody who's not rogue. They've got to be able to follow instructions because ADAS is a very process-driven, step-by-step process. And if you skip any of the steps or miss any of the steps, usually you don't have the successful outcome. So detail-oriented people, gamers, anybody who's into technology and electronics. So this is not necessarily a typical, mechanic job.
It's really interesting.
It is because they've got to have a curiosity also. Somebody who, when something doesn't go right, they don't just throw their hands up and say, I don't know how to do this. They figure out how to get it done, right? And they have a network of people on a bulletin board or whatever they call it nowadays. The forum, they go to a forum for information. They've got to have commitment and that curiosity, innate problem-solving skills. Definitely. Yeah, those are different than that's not necessarily different than a diagnostician. It's just slightly different.
Got it. Thank you. And so, again, the purpose of this interview today was simply for a shop owner who is either in the general repair space or the aftermarket space, who's heard of ADAS, but maybe not really encountered it too much. And they're looking to better understand the basics. It's everywhere since 2022.
The cameras are all standard since 2022. But what I failed to mention is that they didn't say how to implement the standard. So now there is a new standard that is going to be implemented and has regulations for 2029. So by 2029, every car must actually, or car and truck, production vehicle less than 10,000 pounds, must operate in the same way with respect to its automatic emergency braking and its pedestrian automatic emergency braking. It doesn't have to necessarily use the front-facing camera. It can also use the radar or any combination of camera and radar. But the way that it stops, the distance that it stops in, that's all going to be regulated in 2029 for the OEMs, 2030 for the aftermarket. We must be compliant. The NHTSA has determined that alterers and shops have to be compliant to make the car not inoperative.
So ADAS is also an industry of standards, really, is what I'm hearing.
It is.
And we have to be prepared for that leading up to it. It affects all aspects of the aftermarket because, like you said, windshield, tint, lift kits, bumpers, all that sort of stuff.
Brakes and tires, suspension.
Brakes and tires, exactly, and suspension. So
just everything.
Yes. So this is something that tire shops are going to need to be thinking of and things like that. There's a number of tools and equipment that is involved, but at the same time, there's a number of resources that are out there, which again, thank you for assembling, and we'll make sure are posted as part of this. And then there's an emerging talent pool that's going to be required that is not just individuals who are innately good at problem solving, but a little bit more technologically advanced and process driven, which I found really interesting that you talked about gamers. To me, that's actually kind of exciting when we think about career paths finding their way into careers today. So for somebody who's kind of looking at this for the first time, was there anything jumped over or missed there? It's a big topic.
If you don't know anything about it, familiarize with it. If you already think you know a little bit, go to some of those education websites like iCar. They've got some great video clips about all the different things. I only talked about AEB and PAEB and the forward-facing camera, but there's surround view and there's the rear radars for blind spot. There's the parking sensors, which are just the old ultrasonics. That's also considered ADAS. There's just so many tentacles and aspects of it. But no, I think we hit the main forward-facing topic, and the regulations that are coming down the pike. It's a good place to get started. And if you have experience enough to start searching out some partners in the industry, do that.
Awesome. Mike, I'm glad I called you. I knew I could get the straight answers. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And thank you for those of you who attended today. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.